For a back.
Miss Davis on slide
Such and so.
Can you tell us this slide? We can get you to it.
Okay,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, any other issues that we need to take up? Let's bring jurors then. Waiting members of the jury. Ms. Shakita, further evidence for the state?
State calls Kevin Steinbeck.
Put your left hand on the Bible. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony to this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, but nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you, ma'am. Come on, have a seat, please.
Ms. Shakita.
Please state your name, ma'am.
Heidi Steinbeck.
And Kevin Steinbeck, how are you employed, Ms. Steinbeck?
I work for the Wake County Sheriff's Office.
And what is your title at the Wake County Sheriff's Office?
I'm a captain over security operations.
And what are some of your responsibilities and duties as a captain over security operations?
I handle all the jail records. I'm a legal assistant to the attorneys for the Wake County office. I do all the videos, the phone calls, the badges that we use to get in and out of doors, the law library, religious diets, stuff like that.
Anything sort of that's needs special needs or special attention comes to you.
Yes, ma'am.
And you said you're responsible for, are you also aware of how inmates are housed at the Wake County Jail?
Yes, ma'am.
And is there a log that is kept to document where a particular person is at a particular time, that is a particular inmate is being housed at a particular time?
Yes, ma'am.
And is there just one jail, or can you tell us about that?
We have 2 jails.
Okay, and where are those facilities?
The Public Safety Center is downtown on Salisbury Street. And
Right next door to us, actually?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And then Hammond Road is the detention center, and that's at 331 Hammond Road.
And where are the majority of the inmates held?
Hammond Road.
Have you had an opportunity to review the jail records as it relates to where inmate by the name we've been referring to him by his initials as MB, who's let me ask it this way: do inmates have a particular number that are associated with them when they come to the jail?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm going to be referring to inmate number 65421, initials MB. Is it your understanding that MB came to the Wake County Jail in January of 2014?
January, what was the date?
I just said in January of 2014.
Yes, ma'am.
Around January 3rd. I think
Yes,
that's his
ma'am.
testimony. And initially, was he housed in a particular cell?
Yes, ma'am.
What was the first cell that sort of first real cell once he's actually housed into the jail where he went?
Let me find the page.
If I can draw your attention to about January 15th.
On January 15th?
Yes, ma'am.
January 15th is in 1, F is in Frank, 43.
And what does that mean, 1F?
1F is we have 20 dorms at the detention center, and they're labeled. He's on the first floor, F dorm, bed number 43.
And about how many particular inmates are housed within 1F?
56.
Okay. And if you can, going from January 15th, scroll through his records, does he stay in 1F43 for a period of time?
Yes, ma'am.
At some point, is he moved to 1F28, maybe July of 2014? Specifically, I'm looking at July 10th, 2014.
Right. I'm sorry. Well,
Sure.
the document I'm looking at has all kinds of information on
Okay.
here.
Sure, but at July 10th, 2014, was he moved within that pod?
Yes, ma'am. He went from 1F43 to 1F28.
And when there are 56 inmates in a particular pod, other than sleeping, can they commingle with each other?
Yes, ma'am.
From July of 2014 up until February 4th of 2015, does it appear he stayed in that 1F28?
And what was the date?
February 4th, 2015.
Yes, ma'am.
Where did he move after that date?
He moved from 1F28 to medical observation.
And then after being in medical observation, was he rehoused?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did he go at that point?
He went to 2A as in Alpha 33.
And so all of the inmates in 1F can mingle with each other or talk to each other in common spaces, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
When he's moved to 2A, would he be able to communicate with anyone in 1F at that point?
No, ma'am.
I want to turn your attention to the defendant, Travion Smith. Specifically, if you could look back on July 18th of 2013. Not July, December 18th, 2013, sorry. Oh, you have July. Where was he prior to July 18th of 2013? I'm sorry, let me ask it in an easier way. Did he move into 1F on July 18th, 2014?
Are we on 14 or 13? I'm sorry.
I'm having some serious issues with numbers. in
It's
here.
okay.
December 18th, 2013, where did he come to?
He went from 1J05 to 1F24.
Let me say this one last time. December 18th, right before going into 2014, he moved to 1F what?
24.
Had he been in 1F prior to that? Look, staying on that same date, where was he moved from?
He was moved from 1J.
And so do
05.
F and J correspond, or all the folks in F can talk to each other?
Just the ones in F.
And I want to take you from December 18th of 2013 all the way through September of 2014.
Okay.
Does it appear that he was housed in that same 1F24?
Yes, ma'am.
And after that point, did he move? And if I can draw your attention to specifically November 10th, 2014.
Yes, ma'am. He went from 1F24 to 2E34.
And when we talked about MB moving to 20A, would 20A and 20E interact?
No.
And so your understanding is that from 12/18/2013 until November 10th of 2014, this defendant was in 1F.
Yes, ma'am.
And then to recap, MB from January of 2014 2014 up until February of 2015 was also in 1F.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination.
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have one.
Yes.
About initially MB moving from 1F to 56 to 24. Is that just different bunks where they sleep?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions.
All right, and members of the jury, I'll just clarify for your purposes that the witness, the individual identified as MB is the same person who testified as a witness in this case last Friday. All right, very good, ma'am. You may step down. Further evidence for the state?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the state would call Ms. Tracy Davis to the stand.
Waller?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Agent Davis.
Good morning.
Will you please state your name for the record?
My name is Tracy Davis. My maiden name was Lipscotch, and that's spelled L-I-P as in Paul, S-K-O-C-H.
So when we've heard of Tracy Lipscotch during the course of this trial, you are the same person as Tracy Davis.
That's correct, yes, sir.
All right. Agent Davis, can you please tell us where you're employed, ma'am?
I am currently employed with CCBI, which is the City County Bureau of Identification. I am a forensic examiner within the latent print unit.
Tell us what your duties and responsibilities are as a forensic examiner.
I perform latent print comparisons and also footwear comparisons to determine if there is an identification. I supply notes and reports to that and then testify in court when needed. I also utilize the SICAR database, which is the Search Image Capture and Retrieval database. It's a database to search shoes to determine the brand or model of the shoe. I also testify in court when needed.
Agent Davis, you said that you're, as a forensic examiner, you analyze latent prints, is that right?
Yes, sir.
What type of latent prints do you examine?
I do latent finger and palm prints and feet prints, and then I also do footwear.
So you do both jobs there at CCBI.
Yes, sir.
Approximately how many latent fingerprints have you examined while being there at CCBI?
I started my job with CCBI in October of 2008, so that's about 7.5 years. Since then, a ballpark figure would be thousands upon thousands, possibly even in the 10,000s.
And then you also mentioned you're a footwear examiner.
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about what that duty entails.
As a footwear examiner, I like to kind of say that I have two hats. With fingerprints, we are looking at individuality and uniqueness, but we also do that with footwear examination. I take latent, unknown footprints from a crime scene. And when I say footprints, let me clear that up. It should be shoe prints or footwear. And I compare them with the known shoes that may be given to me by an investigator or the district attorney, and I compare them.
And are there similarities and differences between examining latent fingerprints and then the shoe wear impressions you've been speaking about?
There are similarities. We do take an unknown from a crime scene and we do compare them to the known. The differences between footwear and fingerprints is that, and I go on to explain this a little bit later on, but with footwear, it's a mass-produced item. So you start with many shoes, or one shoe, but it's mass-produced. And the more that you wear your shoe, the more it actually makes it unique, which can be a little bit different than fingerprints, where you're born with your fingerprints being unique. So I go on the aspect of the more that you wear it, the more it makes it unique.
Footwear examination, can you tell us a little bit about approximately how many opportunities you've had to do footwear examination while you've been there at the City County Bureau of Identification?
So since I've started And if I could back it up, prior to CCBI, I worked at the City of Durham Police Department in their Forensic Services Unit. I had crime scene responsibilities as well as latent prints. So since 2007, I've had over 1,000 hours of forensic-related training. Approximately 300 of those hours would be in latent prints, and then a little over 300 would be in footwear. Since then, I've taken multiple classes and workshops and successfully completed those with certificates. In 2011, I completed a footwear and tire track training program that was sponsored through the NIJ, which is the National Institute of Justice. It was located at the NFSTC, which is the National Forensic Science and Technology Center. It was a 9-month training program that consisted of 5 one-week classes, so 5 weeks, and I successfully completed that and got my certificate in that.
And when you say that you're doing those classes, Agent Davis, are you just sitting in a classroom, or is there also practical exercises that you have to go through?
Many are sitting through it, but then there's also, like he said, there's cases and prep work to do with it, and then practicals.
And do you have to reach a certain proficiency level in order to get a certification?
So currently with CCBI, I completed in 2011 the training program, and then I also started casework within CCBI, and I had to be rendered competent in that. I also have certifications through the IAI, which is the International Association for Identification. I'm certified as a footwear examiner through them. I'm also certified as a latent print examiner through the IAI, as well as certified as a crime scene analyst through the IAI. Currently, I'm only one of a handful of people in the world with those 3 specific certifications.
And what are those 3 certifications, Agent Davis?
I'm certified as a footwear examiner, a latent print examiner, and a crime scene analyst.
What's a crime scene analyst?
It's like a second level of a crime scene investigator.
And you said the IAI?
Yes.
What is that agency?
The International Association for Identification.
We'll back you up just a little bit further, Agent Davis. Tell us a little bit about your educational background now.
I received my bachelor's degree in biology with a chemistry minor through the University of Missouri. After that, I was an assistant scientist with analytical biochemistry labs in Missouri, and then I went into crime scene in Durham.
And I'm sorry, when did you say you started in Durham?
2007.
2007. And then you came to CCBI in 2008?
Yes, sir.
And during the course of your, we'll go with training first, approximately how many footwear examinations have you done during just training exercises?
Just training somewhere between 50 and 100 cases, and these cases can have multiple shoes that need to be compared within it with multiple shoe impressions. So you may have 50 to 100 cases, but then you may have, 5 impressions within it, and then each pair of shoes is 1 pair of shoes, so you have 2 shoes that you have to compare, so it can be multiple, way more than 50 than 100.
And then Agent Davis, in terms of your employment history, both at Durham and then now with the City County Bureau of Identification, how many opportunities have you had to do a footwear examination for cases?
For footwear cases, I'd say I've probably done about 20 cases.
Both at CCBI and in Durham?
Durham, it was just strictly latent print examination. The footwear really began in CCBI.
And Agent Davis, have you had the opportunity to testify in court regarding footwear examination?
Specifically with footwear, I was tendered an expert one time in Superior Court.
Do you recall when that was, Agent Davis?
I believe 2013.
And what court was that you were tendered as an expert in?
It would be in Wake County in Superior Court.
And what area at that time were you tendered as an expert in, Agent Davis?
In footwear examination.
Agent Davis, were you asked to perform an analysis and a comparison and an evaluation in this case regarding footwear?
Yes, sir.
And were you provided information by, again, law enforcement officers in the district attorney's office regarding the homicide and burglary that occurred at the Allister Apartments?
Yes, sir.
And have you reviewed that data and your information, or are you prepared to testify as to your findings here in court today.
I am.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask Tender Agent Davis in the area of footwear examination as an expert witness.
Any objection? All right, her testimony will be received as proffered.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Davis, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this case to start with?
My primary duty within CCBI, like I said before, is latent print examination, but I also do footwear examination, so I'm one of two within CCBI that's trained. So every now and then when I actually have time, I actually will pull footwear cases and work them. I had began to work this particular case. We had received the shoes that were being asked to compare and what was collected from the crime scene, and I started that in December of 2014.
So that was your first involvement in the case?
Yes, sir.
And did you actually have the shoes at that point?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
And then how did you progress in terms of your involvement in the examination of this, in this case?
Once I began, I did complete part of the case for the homicide, but then I realized that there was a burglary that was also attached to the case. So I spoke with Assistant District Attorney Waller and was advised that there were multiple other items within the burglary to compare, so then I completed that comparison.
And when was your final report completed, Agent Davis?
I believe it, if I may refer to my notes, Your Honor. The final report was in the middle of December of 2015.
Now, Agent Davis, you've talked to us a little bit about footwear examination. Have you prepared a PowerPoint presentation here for the members of the jury to help illustrate your testimony?
I have.
And tell us a little bit about why you decided to do that PowerPoint presentation.
Footwear comparison has very complex parts of it, but also very simplistic parts of it. Just, looking at a footwear, just seeing if the patterns match. But I tend to find that with the complex parts of it, it's easier to see visually. So trying to explain part of my job and how I do my comparisons would probably be better seen.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
And I do realize this is going to be slightly out of order, Madam Clerk, but it's going to be State's Exhibit number 346. And we will skip 341 and 340 and 341. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Agent Davis, I'm handing you what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit number 342. If you'll take a look at that document, I know it's many documents, but it's in a bundle. You take a look at that bundle of documents and tell me if you recognize what that is.
State's Exhibit 342 does appear to be my PowerPoint presentation printed out.
And does that appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as when you provided it to our office?
Briefly going through it, yes. Yes, sir.
And would that PowerPoint presentation help illustrate your testimony here today?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit number 342 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? It's allowed for illustrative purposes.
And permission to publish that PowerPoint on the screen behind Agent Davis.
Yes, sir.
And I'm also going to approach her and hand her
I'd suggest turning it slightly.
I'm going to hand her a clicker, and if I may move the screen. All right, Agent Davis, is this the PowerPoint presentation that you've prepared here for us, ma'am?
Yes, it is.
We'll make sure the clicker works. There we go. All right. Footwear examination, if you can kind of get us started a little bit in terms of what you do in regards to footwear examination.
Okay. My head's going to be turned, so if you can't hear me, just kind of holler and I'll try to make it a little bit better. Like I said before, sometimes some of the nature of footwear examination can be a little bit complex, so bear with me while I try to explain it a little bit. But this case can be a little bit complex, so if at any point in time you can't hear me, just kind of make a little motion.
And before you move on, Agent Davis, I'm sorry about the letters behind your name. There it says Tracy Davis and Lipscotch in parentheses. What do those different letters represent?
The three different groupings of letters: CLPE is Certified Latent Print Examiner, CCSA Certified Crime Scene Analyst, and then CFWE is Certified Footwear Examiner.
Thank you.
So let's start off with explaining what exactly is the parts of the shoe. And we'll start with what is an outsole. The outsole is the bottommost part of a shoe that comes in contact with the ground. So when you're looking at the shoe, you have the upper part of it, that's what we call it, and then we have the bottom part of it, which is the outsole. The outsole can be made of a variety of materials such as rubber, leather, or even fabric. So what is a footwear impression? And you're going to hear me say footwear impression quite a bit. So every time a person takes a step onto the ground, their outsole can be pressed onto the surface, and that can cause a deformation of the surface. And I have an example, and I hope you guys can see this, but when you're stepping into a pliable surface such as sand, you've actually depressed onto there, and that leaves a replication of what your outsole looks like. It can also result in the transfer of materials onto the surface from the outsole, and I have examples of that. On the left-hand side, I have an example of a footwear impression on a door, and if you look really closely, I don't know if I have a pointer on this.
I don't believe it has a corner.
If don't mind if I get up
Yes,
just a
ma'am.
second. Right within this top upper area is actually a transfer of mud, and I've just used these as an example. You may see darker areas, and that's actually when the agent has come in and processed, meaning put some powder onto it to make the shoe a little bit more visible. On the right-hand side photo, you actually have an example of a wooden floor, and there was dirt on the shoe, and dirt or mud, and when they stepped onto the surface, it caused a transfer of that residue, that dirt or mud, onto the floor.
Your second sentence there in the first bullet, Agent Davis, it says this can cause a deformation of that surface. Every time you take a step, do you leave a footwear impression, or are there certain factors that contribute to whether a footwear impression is left or not?
It's much like fingerprints. You're not always going to leave a shoe impression or any residue on the surface that you touch. Your shoes could be clean, so you may not leave anything. You may step into a rough surface such as gravel, and so you may not leave a footwear impression behind. Also the environment, if it's rained that day or if it's dry, some of that rain could have wiped away the impression, or if it's, like I said, dry, you may not leave anything behind. Footwear impressions can give details such as brand, style, or even sizing. So I've taken that sand impression and kind of blown it up a little bit for you, magnified it, just to show you that I can tell that this is probably going to be a sneaker, and I just kind of know that from training, but I can also tell that this isn't a high-heeled shoe, just because the heel of it doesn't have that little pointy toe. I can also tell that it's probably not going to be a cowboy boot because the front of the shoe, and put that out, you have the heel of the shoe here, and then the front portion of the shoe, it's not pointy like you would see on a cowboy boot. So I can tell right away that this is probably going to be an athletic shoe. I can also probably tell you a little bit about the brand of the shoe. If you look closely in the middle arch area, you can make out some lettering, and you're not going to always see this because, like I've said before, it's a chance impression. But in this particular one, I can make out the N, the I, the K, and the E. And that can tell me that that could be a Nike shoe. So that's kind of the information that I can get from when I see a latent impression. These impressions can then be collected and then compared to a person's known shoes to determine if that shoe may have left the impression.
And this may sound like a kind of silly question, Agent Davis, but known shoes. How did you receive known shoes in your job?
Mostly, I receive them from investigators who have collected them from a person's feet when they have been volunteered to give the shoes or when they were in custody and the shoes were given to the investigator.
So the known shoes, they're not an example or a model shoe, they're the actual shoe that's involved in a specific case.
These shoes were taken from a specific person's feet, so we know where they came from.
Thank you.
So what is a shoe standard? A shoe standard is a controlled recording of the outsole of a shoe. The shoes are generally photographed, and a standard or test impression may be made to aid in comparison. So, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this. When you get a shoe, one of the ways that I like to make a shoe standard is I take the outsole. So if this, my hand, my palm represents the outsole, I will put powder on the bottom of the shoe, and then I'll take a piece of wide, clear tape, that sticky side, and I will put it onto the shoe. And I'll kind of rub it down, and then I'll lift up that tape, that sticky portion I'll put onto a white card. So what I've lifted up is that powder portion of the representation of the outsole. And that's kind of an example. I have a shoe with the outsole. I've placed powder on it, lifted the tape up, and put it onto the white card. So on the right-hand side is an example of a shoe standard. I can then copy that onto a clear sheet of transparency, and I can use that to kind of put over an impression to sort of compare, aid in my comparison.
And we've seen some fingerprint cards during the course of this case. Is this, what you're describing here, similar to those fingerprint cards that we've seen?
Are you talking about latent print cards or
Yes,
Timprint cards? It'd be very similar in the way of collecting a latent print, where powder was applied, lifted up, and then put onto the white card.
And when you take this shoe impression, do you have to flip the shoe impression in any way?
Not right yet. Because, and I'll explain this a little bit more, when you have your shoe and you step onto it, you're actually looking as it is. However, when I take my shoe and I put my powder and then I put it onto the card, I'm actually flipping it when I put it on the card. So it's what we call a horizontal reversal, or a mirror image of what the shoe may look like. And I know that can be a little confusing, but it's because the piece of tape is sticky on this side and I have to put the sticky part onto the white card. So how are shoes analyzed, compared, and evaluated? Shoes are analyzed, compared, and evaluated by looking at both class and individual characteristics, and I'll explain those terms in just a minute. The four areas that are aided during comparison are design, physical shape and size, wear, and individual characteristics. And like I said, I will go into that just a little bit more, but these are the four areas of a shoe that I'm kind of looking at. Design, physical shape, and size are all class characteristics. Wear can be a class or an individual. An individual is individual. So let's kind of go into what is a class characteristic before I talk about any more. A class characteristic is an intentional characteristic made during the manufacturing process and is shared by more than one shoe. So your manufacturer wants to put in circles, squares. They intentionally put that in, and more than one shoe shares that. Because these shoes are mass-produced, they contain characteristics that are shared by multiple shoes. And I'm going to give you an example of those four areas that we talked about. Design. Design is, like I said before, what the manufacturer wants to put in there. That could be anything from aiding and gripping to maybe basketball shoes would have more square or rounded elements to aid with running. It depends on the manufacturer. So what you see here, this could be a boot, just because of the heel is a little bit of a rounded element. Maybe some of those, when I say elements, it's just the basic shapes that you see in your shoe. They could use for gripping, walking, etc. Physical shape and size. So this does not mean a manufacturer's shoe size. When I say manufacturers, I'm talking about a men's size 9, a child's size 5. I'm not talking about that with this. I'm talking about each element within the actual design. So if you take a look, if you can see the red arrows, this is the size and shape of each element within the pattern with respect to the other elements in the pattern. So I see, in the design, I see a circle with a dot. Now, as your shoe size increases, the spacing between each element may also increase. Not always, but it does. So I'm also looking at the polygons or the different shapes. There's a shape up there that may look like, for lack of a better term, a pair of pants. And I'm looking at the spacing between the other shape that looks like a pair of pants. You can use this to exclude but not to identify. So I can exclude maybe a dress high heel based off of that, but I cannot identify the shoe because it is a class characteristic. And then wear. Wear is defined as an erosion of the outsole due to frictional and abrasive forces which occur between the outsole and the ground. Very generically said, the more that you walk on a shoe, the more you wear away the shoe. So in the picture, I have just a blown up view of a shoe, and when you have a new shoe and you purchase it, the second that you touch the ground, you're starting to wear away that outsole. If you look on the picture at the very right-hand side, the heel, you see a brown area. That's actually where the rubber has worn away, and that would be wear. Now we look at two different types of wear. We look at position of the wear, which is where the wear pattern on the shoe is the greatest in comparison to the rest of the shoe. So position of wear would be, I could see more wear on the heel than I can do on the upper part of the shoe or the toe area. And then degree of wear. How substantial is that wear? I would say that towards the heel, that wear is pretty substantial. It's a higher degree of wear than in the rest of the shoe.
You mentioned on your initial slide about how shoes are analyzed, compared, and evaluated, that wear can have both class and individual characteristics. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. As you wear your shoe, the more individualized it becomes. So in the beginning, let's say you just purchased a pair of shoes and you've worn it one or two times, that may be class characteristics. Everybody's going to kind of wear down the shoe. But the other factors that influence it, it becomes more unique. So if you have greater wear in the heel versus someone who just purchased the pair of shoe, it makes more unique. So the factors that can actually influence it, there's several, but pressures exerted by the foot inside the shoe. So your weight-bearing area will wear more quickly. And I have an example of this. If you're flat-footed versus high-arched. I personally am high-arched, so I tend to wear the outside areas of my shoe. If I have my shoe, you have the medial and you have the lateral. The outside is where I tend to wear it. And then on my heel, I tend to wear it on the outside areas as well. So being flat-footed or high-arched can affect it. Your habits or activities of the wear. Is the person a runner, or do you sit at your desk most of the day? If you're a runner, you're probably going to wear down your shoes a little bit more quickly than if you sit at your desk. And then the manufacturing, such as your outsole type. Rubber versus canvas versus fabric. Sometimes you see the fabric on flip-flops. Those are going to wear down a little bit more quickly than your rubber will. And then the surface you're being walked on. Do you walk on a tiled floor all day, or do you work in construction and you walk on gravel all day long?
I realize we're going to get into this in greater detail in a few minutes, Agent Davis, but surface. How big of a part in the surface play in what you do in both in terms of analyzing a shoe and then doing a comparison to a foot impression?
Surface play is just about as big of a factor as actually leaving the impression itself. Just like with fingerprints, if you leave your fingerprint on, let's say, a rocky, gravelly, or just a brick, you're less likely to leave a print than if you touch a smooth surface. The same thing is with shoes. It's a chance impression, and shoes more likely have an uneven surface or more often will come in contact with textured surface than a fingerprint. So there's a lot more factors that come into play. So we talked about class. Now let's talk about individualizing characteristics. Individualizing characteristics occur randomly within the outsole. These characteristics are not intentionally manufactured and therefore makes the shoe unique. They can be cuts, gouges, nail, gum, debris, or anything that may be added into the insole, or I'm sorry, the outsole. So this is what everyday life will kind of do. You've stepped onto a nail, and then now that nail has been embedded into your shoe. It was not added by the manufacturer. And then I just have examples of debris being added, a rock, a piece of wood, or cuts or gouges. Just stepping on things can cause a cut or a gouge. So what is the methodology for footwear examiners? We use ACE-V. It's also what we use for fingerprints as well. A stands for analysis, C is comparison, E is evaluation, and V is verification. And I'll explain that a little bit more. In the analysis portion, I'm actually looking at the latent footwear impression, but I'm also looking at the shoe, and I'm analyzing it. Is there enough information in both of these that I can proceed? I'm also looking for the presence of class characteristics we talked about earlier, overall shape, size, and outsole design. I'm doing that for the latent, and I'm also doing that for the known. I'm also looking for any randomly acquired characteristics such as wears, cuts, tears, and etc. that may be present in the latent footwear impression. Once I've determined that there is enough information present to conduct a comparison, I will move to the comparison phase. The methods of comparing footwear impression evidence that are routinely used are side-by-side comparison and superimposition.
What do you mean by superimposition?
Very simply.
Yeah.
Superimposition is the known standard was copied onto a transparency and then used to lay over the footwear impression and visually compare it at this time. So on the right-hand side picture, I have a footwear standard that I talked about before. I put powder on the shoe, piece of tape, put it on the lift card. I can then copy that onto a transparency and move that over the footwear impression, which would be on the very right-hand side in the red. I can kind of move it over and superimpose it on there. It makes it visually easier to compare.
This ACE-V method that you described, is that a generally accepted method of analyzing footwear impression?
Yes, sir, it is.
And fingerprint impressions as well?
Yes, sir. And it's also a very generic kind of term. You do that on an everyday basis, and I like to say compare it to like picking out paint. You're analyzing what color you like, you're comparing it with the other colors, you're evaluating if it's right for the wall, and then you bring it home and your wife verifies. So it's a very general term. It's just a term for comparison. And then our other one is side by side. You take your known shoe, the bottom of the shoe, and I place it next to the footwear impression, and I'm just kind of visually looking at it side by side. So that's kind of how we do our comparison. Once we've done our comparison, we go on to the evaluation phase where a conclusion can be reached. So I have listed all the conclusions, and I just kind of want to point out that it is a little bit different from fingerprints where you have ID, no ID, or inconclusive. This we have a whole range of evaluations. And I know that this can be a little bit confusing, so I kind of put it on to a slider scale because this is kind of easier to visualize. So up on the screen I have a red line. That's right in the center. It's the neutral area. That's kind of where the examiner starts. On the left-hand side of that red line, the neutral area, is the non-positive associations, and on the right is the positive associations. And then right in the center is also lacks sufficient detail. There's just not enough that you can go forward. So let me kind of explain non-positive. That means that based on class characteristics, I'm able to exclude that shoe. Indications of non-association would be there's just not enough for me to say it wasn't the shoe, but the class characteristics aren't the same. Exclusion being that shoe did not make that impression. On the right-hand side are those positive associations, all the way to the right being identification where that shoe made that impression. And then you have that kind of middle ground where it's not enough to say that it was an ID, but some class characteristics do make up, and they are similar. So limited association of class characteristics means that there are some class characteristics that do match, however, there's some limiting factors on it. Limiting could be photography, could be there's not enough clarity, quality, quantity of these details present that I could firmly go any farther. There could also be just not enough of the impression itself. And then you go further to the right would be more positive. So remember, it's kind of a sliding scale. Association of class characteristics. Remember, it's design, physical shape and size, and wear. So I see those class characteristics, but there's just no identifying characteristics, like no nails or cuts or gouges that I can see. So that's as far as I can go. And then high degree of association. Maybe those class characteristics, I've taken into account everything, and they match up, and I might have one individualizing characteristic, but it's not enough to ID that particular shoe. So that's where I would stay. And then, like I said before, all the way to the end where you're identifying that shoe as making the footwear impression.
Agent Davis, is this moving down the scale, is it based on a point system? Are there certain, numerical values assigned to an impression where you move down the scale, or is it, what process do you use in making your determination here?
So I've made it a scale to kind of help aid on visually how I make my decisions. There is no point. It's based on your training, your education. It's also based on the clarity of the print itself. It's based on the quantity of the details itself.
And do more individualized characteristics, does that help you move down the scale, or?
Yes, sir.
And just to be clear, so if you lack sufficient detail, you don't even get started, essentially, is that right?
That's correct. So once again, let me kind of explain what exclusion versus identification is. Exclusion is the particular known footwear was not the source of and did not make the question impression. Sufficient differences were noted in the comparison of class and/or randomly acquired characteristics between the known and question impression, versus identification, where that particular known footwear was the source of and made the question impression, meaning that the question impression and known footwear share agreement of class and randomly acquired characteristics of sufficient quality and quantity. That's just the definition. And then once you've gone through your evaluation, you can go through the verification, which is another competent examiner applies the same ACE steps to the unknown footwear impression and any known shoes and reach their conclusion. So it's basically another examiner going behind me and making determination.
Is this commonly called peer review?
Yes.
And who at CCBI does your peer review for you?
Forensic Supervisor Rebecca Heinrich.
And she also have training and experience regarding footwear identification and examination.
Yes, she does. So I know this can be a little bit confusing, and I've just given you a lot of information. I'm going to take this methodology that we used. I'm going to find another object, a very benign object, to kind of help it make a little bit of sense. So on the bottom, I have a photo of a latent truck. It's a little blurry, but let's just say that we were asked to compare this photo with a known truck. Let's say this is a traffic light camera and it took a picture of that particular truck. And we're being asked to see if that's indeed a truck that you guys own. So first we do the analysis. Is there enough detail present in this picture of this blurry truck? And I think there is enough detail. I can see that it is a truck. I can see that it's dark colored. It's possibly 2 or 4 doors, and I can use this to exclude cars, fire trucks, ambulances, or any other truck that's a different color.
Agent Davis, we've used the term latent throughout this trial, but can latent evidence apply to things besides footwear impressions and fingerprints and whatnot?
Latent is just a term that refers to what's left behind or what's not readily visibly seen, that we don't know where the source came from. So yes, we can apply it. And on the right is the picture of the known truck that we're being asked to compare it with. So let's go ahead into our comparison phase because I did feel like there was enough information present. We'll look at the similarities and we also look at for the dissimilarities. Both are photos of trucks that appear to be dark colored, 2 or 4 doors. No sufficient differences are noted, but significant limiting factors to include distortion of the latent photo and only a small portion of the truck being visible. So when I say distortion, it just means anything that makes the original a little bit different, a little bit blurry, not as clear. So distortion in this would be a fuzzy photo. And like I said, only a small portion of this latent truck photo is visible. I don't know about the front portion of the truck. I don't see it. So now let's go into our evaluation. And I've put reminder photos on the top right-hand side just in case you forget what it looks like. But our evaluation, we're looking at class characteristics. Yes, they are similar, so we can disregard the non-positive associations. So we're going to take that off. And we're left with, we're still in the neutral area, and do we stay in neutral or do we kind of move farther right? So far we might be moving a little bit farther right because we do notice some class characteristics that are similar. Remember, both trucks appear to be dark colored and they are 2 or 4 door. These are all class characteristics that are mini trucks. There's no sufficient differences noted, but there are significant limiting factors. Differences being damage on the vehicle, the tires are different. Significant limiting factors are there's blurriness, there could be movement of the car or the camera that took it, and there's only a small portion of the truck being visible. So we can only conclude that there is a limited association of class characteristics. And if you look on that slider, it's that option. Because what if the front portion of that truck is red? What if there is damage to the area that isn't visible? So that's kind of our limiting factor. So what does that mean? There is a general association of some class character design. However, other trucks with the same class characteristics are included as the source, such as a dark colored Chevy or a Ford, any 2 or 4 door trucks. If the latent unknown photo was not blurry, we would have a stronger positive association, but that's a limiting factor. If the latent unknown photo had an individualizing characteristic, like a clear photo of the license plate, we may have moved more towards an identification. So that's just an example to kind of help you visualize the range of evaluations that can be made.
And Agent Davis, in what you're doing, are you taking into consideration what maybe other witnesses have said that a person was there or was not there? Or are you just looking at the shoe impression itself?
I typically do not get any of that information. All I get is the shoe impression and the shoes.
Agent Davis, we're kind of moving from the example and the definition part to, I guess, your work on the case. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. CCBI case number 13-4049. There's been a lot of talk in this case about there are 2 different CCBI case numbers. This case number for 13-4049, which area of the apartment are we talking about here?
This is actually the homicide. And I believe there might have been a difference with 13-3149. I'm sorry about that.
That's fine. But in this portion of your presentation, we're talking about the homicide or the upstairs apartment.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, before we get to your actual examination and comparison, what do you have to do to prepare yourself and the evidence for a comparison?
Generally, I take a look at the latent impressions that are associated with the case. I go through my methodology, my analysis. If there's enough information, then I proceed further. And I do believe that within a couple of these items there is. So I take a look at the items itself. If there's more information to proceed that is clear enough, then I will actually look at the shoes that are there as well and then do my comparison.
Yes, sir.
Agent Davis, I'm going to start with a series of photographs. Okay, I'm going to show you a series of photographs, Agent Davis, and we'll just start with State's Exhibits number 343 through 348. So take a look at those documents. There's a sticky note on top of it I'll remove. Take a look at those photographs and tell me if you recognize what they are.
Yes, I do. State's Exhibit 348, 347, 346, 345, 344, and 343 are one of the shoes that I was asked to compare.
And why do you take photographs of the shoes that you're asked to compare?
I will take pictures of the known shoes, how I received them, and then anything close-ups for my examination purposes, kind of help me visually, but just to document how the shoes came and how I did my examination.
And do those photographs appear to correspond to what has previously been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit 57, 57B, and 57A?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And did you use those photographs that you've described, here's 343 through 348, I believe, in your comparison and analysis and comparison regarding these shoes?
Yes, I did.
And did you also use some of these photographs in the PowerPoint presentation that we will see here in a moment? Yes,
I did.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibits number 343 through 348 into evidence for substantive purposes.
Any objection? They are allowed for substantive purposes.
And Agent Davis, just to be clear, State's Exhibit number 57, which is the actual bag the shoes are contained in, does it identify one whose shoes those are?
Yes, it does. The name on the bag bears the name Ronald Anthony.
And is there a CCBI number that is listed on this bag?
Yes.
And what is that CCBI number?
13-3149.
So when you progress through your comparison, anytime we see item number 80, that's the item that is associated with Ronald Anthony's shoes.
Yes.
Based on the collection of these shoes and the processing that we've heard about previously in the trial.
Yes.
Through other detectives and agents and whatnot.
That's correct.
All right. Let's go to State's Exhibits number 349 through 352. You'll take a look at those documents and tell me if you recognize what those documents are.
State's Exhibit 349, 350, 351, and 352 are photographs of one of the other shoes that I was asked to compare.
And do those appear to be the red and black Nike shoes?
Yes.
And again, ma'am, did you use those photographs during the course of your analysis and comparison and evaluation, and also here for the purposes of this PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, sir, I did.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibits number 3 through 352.
Substantive purposes, Mr. Waller?
Yes. It's number 349 through 352. Do they appear, those photographs appear to correspond with the items that have previously been introduced in evidence as State's Exhibit 60A and State's Exhibit 60B?
Yes, sir.
And State's Exhibit CBI bag, who is the State's Exhibit number 6?
CCBI item number 76, and that name is Travion Smith.
So throughout the process that you did, when we hear item number 76, it would be associated with the shoes associated with Travion Smith. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
There's a yellow tag while we were moving these shoes around. What does that yellow tag mean, ma'am?
I it's almost a zip out to, for mine to show that I actually have touched the shoes and to mark them as whatever. It's sort of a chain of custody for myself.
So these yellow zip ties, as you've described, weren't on the shoes.
That's correct.
Something that you added. And those yellow zip ties are on 60A, 60B, 57A, and 57. Put shoes on top of that. State's Exhibits number 353 through 355. If you'll take a look at those documents and tell me if you recognize what they are.
State's Exhibit 353, 4, and 355 are photographed with a macro lens, which is just a zoomed in kind of for a camera. It is of item 76 shoe. State's Exhibit 353 is actually the zoomed-in portion of a standard that I made for item 76.
So Agent Davis, you took these photographs yourself,
Yes, sir.
and they were used during your processing of the red and black Nike shoes.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask to introduce State's Exhibits number 353 through 355 for substantive purpose.
Any objections? They are allowed.
State's Exhibit number 56 and 350. Sorry, removing all.
State's Exhibit 357 and 356 appear to be of one of the items that I was requested to be compared, a piece of carpet that I took photos of.
And that that piece of carpet right there, you actually took these photographs of that carpet. And kind of made your footwear impression on that carpet that you could analyze in any way, Agent Davis.
No, during the analysis, when I opened up the piece of carpet, I determined if there was no footwear impression, so it was unsuitable for comparison.
But you did go ahead and attempt to photograph that, a processing of it.
Yes.
I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit number for substantive purposes.
Any objection? It's allowed.
And then photographs that have been marked as 358 and 359. If you will take a look at those photographs and tell me if you recognize what they are.
State's Exhibit 350, 59 are also of another item that I was asked to compare myself, yes.
And did the photographs assist you in your processing of the event and in your PowerPoint presentation here that we prepared for the members of the jury?
Yes, it did.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit number 358 and 359. These photographs that we've described here, are those the photographs that you get just in your processing and again here in your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Were those all the photographs that you took?
No, they were not.
Approximately how many photographs did you take of these different items of evidence that you've described?
Without going, I like to photograph everything. So,
And were some of those photographs that we've heard testimony about, up close photographs and different lighting and different positions? Are those what those different photographs depict?
yes, oftentimes different sources of lighting, the way you angle your lights can yield different results.
Agent marked for identification purposes is State's Exhibit 360. Do you recognize what that item is?
Yes, these are the photographs that were copied then onto a CD.
And prior to today's date, and then even today, have you had a chance to look at those photographs, and are they in fact the photographs that you used in your processing of these different items?
Yes, they were.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 360 into evidence.
Any objection? They're allowed.
You mentioned a moment ago that part of what you processed was a dryer vent. I'm going to show you what has previously been identified as State's Exhibit 219. 219 is the box, and I'm going to open the box and remove 219A. Do you recognize what that item is, ma'am?
State's Exhibit 219A, excuse me one second, appears to be the dryer vent.
And tell us a little bit about what you did with that dryer vent to process it.
It had arrived to me with black powder already on it. When I got it, obviously, this vent was not flattened. I flattened it myself. It was to help aid in photography because I had different planes to photograph, so it wasn't photographing real well. So I went ahead and it came in the box. I took a picture of how it arrived in the box, and then I noticed that on some of the areas it wasn't processed or didn't appear to be processed because there was no black powder on it. So I went ahead and flattened it, put black powder onto it, and then attempted to relift the impression with a gel lifter. It's just a sticky type lifter.
In States Exhibit 219, can you tell if you are the person that last processed this or that processed this dryer vent?
I can't tell if I'm the last person, but I do have my markings, my date, the case number onto the dryer vent.
And does this dryer vent in its flattened condition, is that the last condition in which you saw it, Agent Davis?
It does appear to be the same.
And then the actual box 219, does it have the corresponding CCBI number for case 13-3149, which I believe you said was just a typo there, but also identifies the victim, the address in which it came, in which the item came from, and a description of the item?
Yes, it does, and I also do have my initials and the date on the outside of the box.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce States Exhibit 219 and 219A instead of this.
Any objection? They are allowed.
We'll come back to that dryer vent in a moment, Agent Davis, but I just wanted to go ahead and talk with you about that just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to hand you what has been marked for identification purposes as 361 and 362. Take a look at those two documents and tell me if you recognize what those documents are.
States Exhibit 361 and 362 appear to be the standards that I made for item number 80, which was the black and blue sneakers.
So the standards for States Exhibits number 57A and 57B.
Correct.
And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a moment, but generally what are standards?
So previously in the PowerPoint, I talked a little bit about the standards, and if I may grab a shoe.
Yes, ma'am.
Taking the outsole of the shoe, I applied powder to it. I stuck a piece of clear tape onto it. That clear tape was then put onto a white card. I can then copy this onto a clear transparency and use that to aid in my comparison.
And are there other methods in which a standard can be made?
Yes.
What are some of the other methods in which a standard could be made?
I generally use the powder with tape method. You can also apply ink to the bottom of the shoe. I really don't like to do that because some of the ink can actually fill in some of the gaps or gouges and it doesn't become as clear. You can also add kiwi or a shoe shine to the bottom of the shoe and step on it. There's also things called an identicator kit, which is a inkless collection method that you're stepping onto a kind of thermal paper and that leaves an impression. I find that the powder onto the shoe outsole tends to work the best.
States Exhibit number 361 and 362, those are actually standards that you created, Agent Davis?
Yes, it is.
And did they assist you in your processing of these shoes and different items of evidence and also in regards to your presentation?
Yes, it did.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce States Exhibit 361 and 362.
Any objection? They're allowed.
And then we'll go to States Exhibit 363 and 364. Can you identify those items for us?
States Exhibit 363 and 364 are the shoe standards that I created for item number 76, the red and black Nike sneakers.
And are those the red and black Nike sneakers behind you there, I believe 60A and 60B?
Yes, sir, they are.
And did you create that standard in a similar method in which you described with the blue and black on shoes as well?
Yes, sir, I did.
Agent Davis, did you use these standards during the course of your processing and also in regards to your presentation here today?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce States Exhibit 363 and 364.
Any objection? They're allowed.
States Exhibit number 365, can you identify that photograph for us?
States Exhibit 365 appears to be the carpet as it was on scene, photographed.
And did you use States Exhibit 365 to do your analysis of the carpet that we talked about earlier?
I did use that in conjunction with the piece of carpet because I had previously spoken with the agent and she had said that when she removed it, it may have caused the impression to disappear. So I just kind of wanted to make sure, double check as a good safety precaution to go back and make sure that I could see anything before it was attempted to be cut out.
So using 365 and the carpet itself, which we've seen previously, no impression existed at the time of your analysis.
That's correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask to introduce 365 into evidence.
Any objection? It's allowed.
I know these are going to be part of your presentation here in a moment, Agent Davis, but in terms of 366, 367, and 368, can you identify those items for us?
State's Exhibit 366, I had forensic photographer Melissa Southern print out some of the photos to kind of aid in my comparison prior to the removal of the vent. So these would be photos that were on scene. 366 would be the impression, the vent, the impression on the vent on scene. State's Exhibit 367 would be the enhancement in tonal reversal. Tonal reversal being the areas that were white, I had them turn black, and the areas that were black, I had them turn white. I'll explain a little bit more here in a minute.
And you use the term enhancement as well. What does enhancement mean?
Just really actually bringing out the qualities a little bit more clear, and making things that are maybe a little bit too light, making them a little bit darker so it's more visual.
Thank you.
And then State's Exhibit 368, which is just the enhancement of the vent itself, the image on the vent.
Is there also something attached to that enhancement photo on the top of the photograph?
Yes. If you remember back when I said that you could take the standard and then make a copy of the transparency, and while I realize this has been cut down a little bit, but this would be an example of what the transparency is, that superimposition, where I take the clear transparency and lay it over. I've added it back when I was actually originally doing the comparison, because I never know when I'm actually going to go to testify. It could be a couple years later, and so this sort of refreshes my memory for when I do go to court.
And State's Exhibits number 366, 367, 368, they were all used during the course of your processing of these shoes and other items of evidence.
Yes, sir.
Also in terms of your presentation here today.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 366, 367, and 368 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? They're allowed.
When you say that you create the standard, the transparency from one of the standards, would that be an example of what we have here in front of us, 363 and 364?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you can use those standards that you get from the shoe to then create an overlay to put on top of a photograph.
Yes, for the superimposition comparison, yes.
Thank you, Agent Davis. Okay, I think we're at the point we can proceed on with your presentation. If you go to your next slide there.
So this is, like I said before, when I receive the shoes, I go ahead and take a picture, kind of how I received them, just to document them. Item number 76, on the outside of the bag, it says 1 pair of Nike React sneakers, size US 9.5, black and orange colors. I believe it to be a little bit more red than orange, but that's what it said on the outside of the bag. The name on the bag appeared to say Travion Smith.
And do you verify the size of those shoes?
Yes, I do.
How do you do that?
There is information on the tongue, the inside of the tongue on the tag portion that does say what the information of what size it is.
Thank you.
I also received item number 80, which was labeled as Nike sneakers blue and black by Ronald Anthony. I was unable to find any sort of information that gave me brand, so I did not report this as a Nike. That's just what was written on the outside of the bag.
Upon an examination of item number 80, which I believe is 57A and B in front of you, did you determine what brand those shoes were?
I was unable to determine brand.
And how about size?
Excuse me. They were a size 10.
And looking at the tongue of the shoe, does there appear to be a brand on the tongue of the shoe?
There was not. When I say the tongue of the shoe, it's that inside kind of portion right there. There was not a brand name on it. There is a like a logo-ish that looks like it could be starter, but there's nothing officially on it. So that could say many things. Maybe there's just no information on it, or it could be a knockoff type shoe.
So the starter does appear to be on the tongue of the shoe, but that is not a brand that you
No.
work with? Or-
Starter is a brand. There's nothing that says starter. It's the emblem itself, but a lot of the knockoffs can have the same emblem.
I see what you're saying. So there's the S in the store, but it doesn't exactly say starter underneath it.
Correct. So I was unable to determine if it was a knockoff, so I just refer to it as a blue and black sneaker.
And there's nothing else on the shoe that says starter in terms of trademark or copyright or anything?
Correct.
Okay. Anything else of note about those shoes? At this point?
Not at this point.
In terms of and are we kind of in the analysis stage of looking at the shoes when you start here, just photographing them like you did here?
Yes.
Go to your next slide.
This was the item of carpet, item number 4, segment of carpet, the photos that I had taken. Which would be States Exhibit 357 and 356. These were the photographs that I took of the carpet once I received it.
Okay. And when you look at item number 4, the segment of carpet, did you even get started?
I couldn't get past the analysis portion. There was no visible footwear that was on it, so I determined that it lacks sufficient detail. And if you remember on that sliding scale, that's in that neutral area where it lacks sufficient detail, so you can't go left or right. There's just nothing that I can do.
And in regards to carpet, is that something that happens in cases that you have lack of sufficient detail that you can't even get started?
First, it is really rare to actually have impressions on carpet. Carpet tends to want to move back when you step on it, especially new carpet. So the fact that there were impressions on the carpet is kind of, it's pretty new. It doesn't really happen all that often. And then if you try to cut it or lift it, then you can make the fibers go back to the way that they originally were, kind of destroying it. It's really rare to have carpet impressions.
Next slide.
And then item number 19, one dryer vent collected from the exterior of the building. On the left photo, I'm not sure if you've seen these photos. I pulled them from our digital crime scene manager. So these were actually taken by Agent Galloway. May I approach?
Yes. Please.
So the bottom was the burglary and the top was the homicide. And then if you look towards the top left, that would be the picture of the vent that I'm talking about, and that's on scene. And then a close-up of that vent from up top, and I believe it was probably from the balcony of the homicide, where they took a picture of what it looked like from up above.
And in seeing the kind of condition of the dryer vent there on the right photo, those photos have been introduced and noticed. I don't have the number right in front of me. I apologize. But when you see that photograph, and there's some things that immediately jump out at you about the condition of that dryer vent that are going to affect your analysis and evaluation and comparison. Comparison and evaluation, I should say.
Yes, sir. First thing that you want to think about is that vent has been outside. So has it rained since it's been collected? Also, is it in an area that would come in high contact or high traffic area? So could there be other people that have stepped on it? Or is there even a footwear impression on there at all? And then you look at the vent itself. The vent appears to be multiple planes on there, and it appears to be kind of crushed in towards the left-hand side. So this is something that I noticed when I first saw it. And then the agent processed it, and the impression on there was a little bit more visible.
Next slide.
So these are the pictures that I took. Item 19, one dryer vent collected from the exterior of the building. The top picture is the vent that I took out of the box, and then I flattened it, like I said before, to kind of aid with my comparison.
So when you began your analysis of this dryer vent, we've seen the dryer vent now in this flattened state, were there any things that were obvious to you right to start with when you started your process of analysis?
The fact that it was a multi-plane surface, so I can count at least 4 different planes on there being It jutted out, and kind of crumpled in on itself, number one. Number two, there is something that is suitable for an impression during my analysis stage, but there appears to either be one or two things happening. Either the shoe stepped on it multiple times, or the shoe hit once, and then the vent crumpled in on itself, causing multiple impressions to kind of be on there. And you kind of have to think about it too, that this vent is located on a wall. So how would I step on the vent if I were going to climb on the vent to get anywhere? So in my mind, I'm thinking probably going to have the toe area be on that. So that's how I'm thinking, that's how I'm doing my analysis.
And so, in general, it was obvious that there was a shoe impression on that vent when you first started your analysis, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, based on what, it was Agent Galloway that we heard from yesterday that processed it. So there was something for you to look for right to start with, or look at right to start with, I should say.
Typically, I won't talk to the agent. They kind of collect it, and then it would be my job to determine if it's actually a footwear impression. So when I did see it, I did note that some of the elements on there did appear to be a footwear. So item 67, which is actually item number 19, but it's given a different item number when it turns into photographs. So just keep in mind that 19 and 67 are one and the same. Item 67-1 is the vent on the scene. So it was processed with black powder, put a scale on, and then photographed. And then if you look at the middle picture, it's item 67-1-1, vent at the scene, that I had our forensic photographer enhance, so darken up a little bit. And then if you move to the picture all the way on the right, it is what I had for forensic photographer Melissa Southern use that enhanced and then tonally reverse it, meaning making the white areas black and the black areas white. I tend to do this because I'm a fingerprint examiner and I like my black ridges with a white background, so it kind of helps.
So that's part of your process or something that you are in making your analysis?
Yes.
And does it help you in terms of making evaluations and comparisons?
For me, I like seeing the black ridges, like I said before, the black elements, and they tend to stick out a little bit better. So that's something that I prefer.
There appears, especially in each of these photographs, what appears to be almost like a computer screen outline. Tell us exactly how you're viewing these photographs at this point.
We have something called Digital Crime Scene Manager, so that stores all of our photographs, and so I will access them by taking a screenshot of what my computer is. That way it gives me the digital image number, so I can reference that back when I do go to court.
At any point, Agent Davis, when you're going through your analysis, comparison, and evaluation process, is a computer doing any work for you, or are you doing this yourself?
This is something I am doing myself. Not only am I looking at the photographs that are on Digital Crime Scene Manager, but I'm also looking at the photographs that Melissa Southern has printed out, and I'm also using that in conjunction with what I see on the vent itself. So if we kind of go through the methodology, we've kind of analyzed it. If you look on the impression A, which is item 19 or item 67-1-2 digital, I'm looking at that impression, and right away I see several elements, and I'm going to stand up a little bit. I see a rectangular portion, and then I see rectangles inside of that, and they sort of appear to connect. I also see that just slightly below, so it's almost like a rectangle within a rectangle. I also see a little area that's void meaning that there doesn't appear to be an area that was touched. So the easiest way that I can explain this is that you have a rubber stamp, and if you've ever used a rubber stamp, you touched it in ink. When you touch that rubber stamp onto a flat surface, that raised area of the stamp leaves that impression of what the bottom of the stamp looks like. The recessed areas don't always touch, and that way you only show the raised areas. So I also have other elements in here that look rectangular, polygon-like, and then I also have other elements outside here that look like could be the edge of the shoe, but I'm not sure because I haven't gone kind of any further than just analysis of it. I also do my analysis of both the knowns, item 80 and number 76. Item 80, the blue sneakers appeared to have some sort of diamond or polygon kind of inverted rectangular pattern throughout the shoe. I don't note any logo in the outside of the shoe. And then on item number 76, I do notate that there is some areas that are void, so areas that would not touch on a surface if it stepped on it. And then I also notate that there are several rectangles with rectangles inside of it. I do notate there's a little Nike swoosh, which is the logo. So based on my analysis, I can move into the comparison phase. Because I see rectangles with rectangles, and I don't see that within this one, I can go ahead and exclude item number 80, the blue and black sneakers. Now, because I see some similarity in class characteristics here, that means that I need to go a little bit further in my examination, and I can't exclude that right away. So I'm going to go ahead and try to blow up areas of this and this that could share class characteristics.
So item 80, when you first saw when you started your analysis, it was kind of out the window right to start with based on what you saw there on the vent and item 80 itself.
Yes, correct. It's more of just a visual thing, but I have standards made from this, and just laying the standard over this, there's nothing that corresponds.
And then moving to item 76, you saw, I guess, some similarities?
Yes, the rectangles within the rectangles, and then the voided area within here.
And so that led you to proceed in your comparison.
Correct.
So, Mr. Weller, we're going to break at this point for lunch recess, and we'll gather back at 2:30. Please recall all the instructions I've given you, members of the jury. Please leave your notepads and gather in the deliberation room at 2:30. Everyone else, please remain seated. Do you want to talk scheduling now, or we can do it at 2:30? I don't know.
We've got, there's going to be right much left with Agent Davis. Maybe around halfway to a little over halfway done with her. And then we do have the medical examiner, and she will be our last witness.
All right.
Okay, well, why don't we just talk right when we return from the lunch recess and think a little bit about how that works out as far as scheduling for the next several days. I'll also note that there is a forecast 40% chance, I think right now, of snow or icy rain tomorrow. So just to keep that in mind. We'll let the jurors know, and just have to see how that shakes out, but bring that to your attention. All right, very good. We'll be in recess till 2:30.
We're standing in recess till 2:30.